Ghost from the Melton Mowbray Park. The Encounter. Did you guys hear what Mr. Thompson did in class today? Laughed Emily, shaking her head. I can't believe he tripped over his own feet during the history lesson. Yeah, and he tried to play it off like he meant to do it, replied Jack, grinning. He's such a goofball. Mr. Thompson should consider a career in comedy, teased Sarah, rolling her eyes. Maybe then he'd finally find something he's good at. Speaking of weird stuff, interjected Tom with a mischievous glint in his eye. Have you guys heard the legend of the ghost in this park? Come on, Tom, not this again, groaned Emily. You always try to scare us with your ghost stories. This time it's real, I swear, insisted Tom. People have seen her, especially around this time of evening. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting shadows across the park, the group began to quiet down, absorbed in a moment of comfortable silence. Suddenly, Sarah pointed toward the bush near the playground. What is that? She asked, her voice tinged with fear. The others followed her gaze, straining to see through the dim light. At first, they saw nothing unusual, just the familiar outline of the bush swaying gently in the evening breeze. But then a faint, shimmering light appeared, growing brighter and more defined as they watched. It seemed to float just above the ground, moving slowly and deliberately toward them. Is it a ghost? Whispered Emily, her voice shaking. Whatever it is, it's definitely not normal, muttered Jack, taking a cautious step forward. Let's check it out. Intrigued and a little uneasy, the group huddled closer together. Jack, the bravest of the bunch, stepped forward cautiously, his eyes never leaving the mysterious light. It's probably just someone playing a trick on us, he said, trying to sound confident. But deep down, he wasn't so sure. As Jack approached the light, it suddenly stopped moving. The air around them grew colder, and a hush fell over the park. The light began to take shape, forming the outline of a translucent figure. It was a woman, dressed in old-fashioned clothing, with a somber expression on her face. Her eyes seemed to hold a sadness that reached out to them across the years. The group stood frozen, a mixture of awe and fear washing over them. The ghostly figure raised her hand, pointing toward a large oak tree at the far end of the playground. Without a word, she began to glide in that direction, her movement silent and graceful. Should we follow her? Whispered Emily, her voice barely audible. I think we have to, replied Jack, his voice steady. She might need our help. Unable to resist their curiosity, the teenagers followed the ghostly woman. As they approached the oak tree, they noticed an old, weathered plaque at its base. The inscription was barely legible, but they could make out the words, "In memory of Emily, taken too soon, rest in peace." The ghostly figure reached the tree and stopped, turning to face them. A tear rolled down her cheek, and she mouthed the words, "Help me." In that moment, the teenagers understood that Emily's spirit had been trapped in the park for generations, unable to find peace. Tom, always quick on his feet, pulled out his phone and began recording. "Guys, this is unbelievable," he whispered, his voice shaking with excitement and fear. Suddenly the ghost began to shimmer more intensely, and a low, haunting wail echoed through the park. The teenagers' fear reached a breaking point, and they turned to run, their footsteps pounding against the pavement as they fled the playground. The next morning, the town was abuzz with news of the ghost sighting. Tom's video had gone viral, making headlines in the local newspaper and spreading like wildfire on social media. Ghostly apparitions spotted in local park. The headlines read, accompanied by grainy images and shaky footage of the translucent figure. People from all over the town flocked to the park, eager to catch a glimpse of the ghost. The teenagers, now minor celebrities, were interviewed by news reporters and inundated with messages from curious onlookers. The haunting continues. Late one night, a couple, Jane and Mark, were making their way home from the pub, the cool night air filled with the remnants of their laughter. As they strolled through the quiet streets, "My feet are killing me," moaned Jane, rubbing her aching heels. "I can't believe we walked so much tonight." "I know, but it was worth it," replied Mark, smiling. "That pub has the best atmosphere." As they walked past the park, Jane suddenly stopped in her tracks. "Did you see that?" she whispered, pointing towards the playground. Mark squinted, trying to see through the darkness. There, near the old oak tree, was a faint, shimmering light. It floated just above the ground, moving slowly towards them. "Okay, that's definitely not normal," said Mark, his voice filled with a mix of excitement and fear. They watched as the light took shape, forming the outline of a translucent figure. The ghostly woman, dressed in old-fashioned clothing, seemed to glide towards the oak tree, her expression somber. "Mark, we need to leave," said Jane, her voice trembling. As they turned to go, the ghostly figure stopped and pointed towards the old plaque at the base of the tree. Jane felt a chill run down her spine. The air grew colder, and an unearthly wail echoed through the park. Panicked, the couple ran, their footsteps echoing in the quiet night. The next morning, they couldn't stop thinking about what they had seen. Jane decided to share their experience on social media, and soon their story was picked up by local news outlets. "Another ghost sighting in the park." Read the headlines. Accompanied by interviews with Jane and Mark, the town buzzed with the news, and more people flocked to the park, hoping to catch a glimpse of the ghostly figure. The police investigation. As the ghost sightings continued to attract attention, the local police department found itself inundated with calls from concerned residents and curious ghost hunters. To calm the growing unrest, the police chief assigned Officer Dan and his partner, Officer Lisa, to investigate the situation and restore order. "This is ridiculous," grumbled Dan as they drove to the park. "I didn't sign up for this job to chase ghosts." "I know," sighed Lisa, "but we need to do something before this gets even more out of hand." As they arrived at the park, they were met with a crowd of people, all hoping to catch a glimpse of the mysterious apparition. The officers made their way through the crowd, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. "Everyone, please remain calm and step back," called out Dan. "We're here to investigate. We'll get to the bottom of this." The crowd reluctantly complied, giving the officers space to move. Dan and Lisa approached the oak tree where the ghost had been sighted. The air was cold and still, and the eerie silence was unsettling. "Let's just get this over with," muttered Lisa, shivering slightly. As they examined the area, they noticed the old plaque at the base of the tree. The inscription was barely legible, but they could make out the words, "In memory of Emily taken too soon. Rest in peace." After thoroughly checking the surroundings, They found nothing suspicious except for the old plaque. They decided to secure the area for further investigation and asked the gathered crowd to leave. "There's nothing more to see here tonight," Dan announced. "Please head home and let us handle this." Reluctantly, the crowd dispersed, leaving the park eerily quiet once more. The officers made a report, noting their findings and the heightened interest in the ghostly sightings. The reveal. Determined to get to the bottom of the mystery, Officers Dan and Lisa continued their investigation the next day. They scoured old town records and visited the local library, hoping to uncover the truth about the ghostly figure. "Look at this," said Lisa, holding up an old newspaper article. "It says here that a young woman named Emily had a tragic accident in the park over a century ago. She was engaged to a local man, but her life took a turn after the incident." "That matches the inscription on the plaque," replied Dan. "But why is she appearing now?" As they dug deeper, they found more information about Emily's story. According to the records, Emily had been involved in a tragic accident during a town festival. She had been crossing the park on her way to meet her fiancé when a runaway horse and carriage struck her. The sudden and shocking accident left the community heartbroken, and her fiancé, devastated by the event, had erected the plaque in her memory. "Maybe her spirit is trying to reach out for closure," suggested Lisa. "It sounds like she has unfinished business." They decided to visit the local historian, Mr. Whitaker, who had extensive knowledge of the town's history. When they told him about their findings, he nodded thoughtfully. "Emily's story is well known in town," he said, "but there have always been rumors that her spirit never found peace. Some say she appears to remind us of the sacrifices people make for others." With this new understanding, the officers returned to the park. They decided to hold a small ceremony to honor Emily's memory, hoping it would bring her the peace she deserved. As they stood by the oak tree, they placed flowers by the plaque and lit a candle. They took a moment of silence to reflect on Emily's bravery and the impact she had on the community. The air grew still, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves. Suddenly the shimmering light appeared once more, and the ghostly figure of Emily took shape. Her expression was no longer somber. Instead, it held a sense of gratitude and peace. "Thank you," she mouthed, her voice barely audible, but filled with emotion. The officers watched as Emily's spirit began to fade, the shimmering light slowly dissipating into the night. The park returned to its familiar, peaceful state, and the officers felt a sense of closure. However, as they turned to leave, a faint whisper carried on the breeze, "Remember me." Dan and Lisa exchanged a glance, unsure if they had truly heard it or if it was just their imagination. The story of the ghost from the park became a local legend, a tale of compassion, courage, and the power of honoring the past. Yet, from time to time, people still claimed to see a shimmering figure near the oak tree, a lingering echo of Emily's spirit watching over the park.